I don't know whether the Jordan Peterson, we mentioned analysis. We both love Zizek. Zizek is a real intellectual with a great depth of analysis. Douglas Murray, very, very well researched. Probably wouldn't describe himself as an analyst. I don't think. Jordan Peterson, not good. So probably a great psychoanalyst, great with people, but the analysis he offers of Marx, postmodernism, Derrida, Foucault, even Zizek it's crap. It's really bad. Academically speaking, it wouldn't pass muster, would it? I mean, I'm not being unfair.
No, and I don't mean, because it's easy to make ad hominem. He strikes me as an incredibly, and you're the expert on emotional dysregulation, etc. He strikes me as someone who's got a lot of personal demons. He's taken on...
And he's been open about that.
But to be fair to him, I think I'd be 6 foot under if I dealt with the pressure he's dealt with. I don't want to sound, who cares what I think in terms of, I don't want to sound patronising. I think he's taken on too much. I think he's taken the world's problems on his shoulders. And I think he deeply, deeply cares about helping people.
Yes.
So,
and you want him to keep doing what he's doing.
So what I want to make very, very clear is I don't wish him an iota of harm.
And neither do I. We want him there.
No, he's great in lots of ways.
He offers value, yes.
I think he's fallen into this trap whereby I hope at least I'm very honest about the things I think I know quite a bit about. And I'll happily offer opinions on anything you ask me about, but I'll tell you if it's an amateur opinion. He speaks about Dostoevsky and stuff in where I know quite a bit about Dostoevsky, and his analysis of Dostoevsky isn't awful. But and maybe it's not all his fault. I think a lot of people, for example, associate Jordan Peterson with being a bit of a Dostoevsky expert, and he isn't.
Nor is he a Nietzsche expert.
And I think this is what harms some of his, I think people associate with him. He internalizes the assumptions of other people that are mistaken, and he feels that he has to offer answers on everything.
Wait a minute. So, right, let's just be really, really clear. You think he has value in the world. I think he has value in the world. You can think that somebody has value in the world and hope that they stick around and criticize them. And if you value intelligence and you value the importance of thinking and analysis, we should be able to do this without getting upset.
Well, can I just, sorry to interrupt.
You're interrupting an interruption. We're going to go into fucking Inception mode in a second. Go on, interrupt my interruption. We'll work back up the levels.
No, but I genuinely don't mean to be rude. It's just that my memory is so awful that if I don't say something at certain occasions, so if I do interrupt you, 1,000 apologies. But if Jordan Peterson died tomorrow, God forbid, his value on this earth was the interview he did with Kathy Newman on Channel 4.
Yes.
Where she says, so what you're saying is the moon is made of cheese.
Yes.
No, Kathy, I never said that.
Could anybody have handled that as brilliantly as he did?
No, I would probably have been taken away in a Securico van for having, thrown an ashtray at her or something, because...
you'd have gone all scout.
Seriously? Are you calling me? I wouldn't have kept it together because she became the embodiment of media cloth-eared obtuseness that I see. There's back to philistinism in the media. There's a self-anointed, self-appointed expertise amongst journalists, and they have no awareness that they're viewed by the public worse than estate agents. And yet somehow... They think because they interview very, very clever people, they're somehow almost higher than them. So Emily Maitlis interviewed potentially, someone suffering from generations of inbreeding and got the better of him and seems to think she's Einstein's niece.
Right.
It's like, Emily, you're not.
Yeah.
I don't want to break this to you.
Yeah.
But she's in an environment where everyone tells her she's wonderful.
Yes.
I don't know about you. I know a bit about your background from your audio book available online.
Did you listen? Oh, okay.
And no offense, but it really helped me sleep.
Lad. Fuck it, I just got burned.
No. What I meant by that was I'd listened to all of it, but you've got a very sonorous voice.
I do, yes.
Which is brilliant. I did radio. My sister, I said, one of my first radio interviews, I said to my big sister, whose opinion I deludedly, like a little puppy, always seek validation from. And I was really enthusiastic. It was one of my first big interviews. And I said, how did it sound? And her exact words were, like a Mardy Ringo Starr. So I am under no illusions. My voice is rebarbative and annoying. You have a depth and tonality that I can only dream of. So
Thank you, darling. Thank you.
So you would not get me to read an audiobook.
No, I was the thing that I wanted to do when I was a kid was I wanted to be an actor.
Yeah,
and that was beaten out of me. And then I got qualified as a hypnotherapist. So there's a lot of like voice training to induce hypnotic trance. Now that audiobook you've listened to, I don't really drink that much anymore, and I don't party. The night before I did the first 6 chapters, I went out with my sister. One of her friends in California launched a range of psychedelic gummies, which is now legal. And we tried the merchandise. The night before, I was tripping balls, downing tequila shots, then bringing myself back up with this, that, and the other thing. And then 10 o'clock the next morning, I reported for duty at the studio to find it was a Christian Bible reading studio. Surrounded by crosses, different versions of the Bible, these lovely American people. Good morning. Would you like a coffee? I was like, oh God, I need an exorcist. And then we began recording, and it was chapter 1, the fight of my life. And I was like, how do I bring myself out of the Leonard Cohen range of like, I was down here with the croaking. God, it was painful. And I was like, I'll remember this. I sweated my way through it. But I'm glad that
seriously,
it sounded nice.
It really does sound very good.
Thank you. That's very kind. I will now bring us up the levels of inception. So my point of view with Jordan Peterson, when it comes to psychology, as a public speaker on psychology, I think he's probably the best alive today. Yeah. When it comes to, and especially on the subject of personality and IQ, these are his fields of specialization. You can't touch him. Brilliant. Offers value, hand over fist, really has saved lives, genuinely. I know that people get very evangelical about him, and it's a little bit annoying because they exaggerate it, but he really has. You said, and you said it quickly, I liked it. You slipped it in there. He's internalized, what did you say? He's internalized the opinions of others.
Other people's assumptions.
Other people's assumptions. So I had a nastier way of saying it. After the Slavoj Zizek debate, I was like, I'm getting the Wikipedia entry level analysis of things here, and less than that. Less than the Wikipedia entry. It felt to me like he hadn't looked up who Slavoj Zizek was. Because at one point he says, well, you're a very strange Marxist. And I was like, who the fuck do you think Zizek is? Do you think he's going to turn up with a little commie hat on, with a picture of Stalin and a pierced septum or something? He's not watched a documentary or an interview with him. Then I got his version of postmodernism, which apparently is exactly the same as social constructionism, Marxism.
It's Stephen Hicks's, let's put everything together in a big bundle.
Yes.
And blame it for the world's ills.
So that was going to be my follow-up thing, which would piss off Jordan Peterson fans and Stephen Hicks fans. Stephen Hicks has an audiobook online about Nazism. He has audiobooks online on Stalinism. I love the trigonometry interview. How do I say this without sounding snobby? I like it because I'm not an intellectual, and I'm self-aware enough to know I'm getting the A-level. Our A-levels are, what do they call them in America, an A-level?
Well, they don't really do it because they have a high school.
Okay.
They do like multiple choice exit tests like LSATs and GSATs. And
so whatever you would get at high school that you would teach a 17, 18-year-old, it's at that level. And it's fine. It's solid, but it's not deep. And even I'm not a historian. I'm not a philosopher. And I know with Stephen Hicks stuff, I'm like, this lacks some nuance. This is definitely lacking.
But even
nuance.
references. Yeah. So if you're going to slag off, there's one, sorry to give such a specific example, but I'm arguing that we need to get more specific sometimes. Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay wrote a book called Cynical Theories.
Yes.
So I combed through it, and to be fair to them, it's mostly about the way in which gender issues have been hijacked by, woke extremists. And there is stuff in... especially people like Judith Butler, who I know next to nothing about gender theory. So you might as well be talking to a drunk guy at a bus stop. But Helen Pluckrose, she actually, is it Pluckrose or Pluckrose? Pluckrose. She mentions Derrida and makes a quite sneering comment that she's talking about how you can attribute blame for a lot of the things that are going on in society and how they can be tracked back to theorists. And she said Derrida, and then she has a throwaway comment along, to the extent that he can be understood at all. Now, I think that's an important point. I am not a Derrida fan. I am going back and trying to read Derrida because as an active academic, I tried to read him, failed miserably. But there are enough people whose opinion I respect who've said, no, Paul, you're too thick. You need to go back and try again.
Okay.
He doesn't, but then, for example, I remember reading The Spirit of Marxism, and unless my memory's faulty, it's a book that Derrida wrote, and I think it's based upon one of the lectures he gave at somewhere like UCLA in America, and it's on page unless my memory's faulty, page 70. He says words to the effect of, "Now I will begin to address the question."
Right.
And I'm thinking, Jacques,
please, for the love of God,
it's taken 70 pages as an intro.
Yeah.
So he doesn't, I struggle with him, maybe for stylistic reasons. He's also immensely difficult. But the idea that the scarcely literate graduates have read a load of Derrida and then torn through the cultural establishment and are ruining people's lives is just laughable.
Yeah.
They definitely haven't read Derrida. And if they have read him, they definitely haven't understood him. And even if they have understood him, there's precious little in Derrida that you could use for nefarious purposes.
Right.
It's fascinating stuff. It's all about intertextuality and levels of difference and all this type of stuff, which for someone who like me who's interested in textual analysis is brilliant. But Foucault is a lot more accessible. And Foucault was a mad, fascinating historian. And you can treat him just as a historian. And there are many books you can read by Foucault. He tends to start off, his books with like a scene setting thing. So in Discipline and Punish, there's an horrific description. He was the regicide, the guy, I think he tried to kill Louis XIV or XV.
Yes.
In the 1750s, his execution.
Yes. Tell them.
I couldn't teach that now at university because you imagine the trigger warnings.
Oh, yeah.
This is a guy, you chip in with bits, but before he's pulled apart by Shire horses,
yes.
He's had bits soldered out of him with a blacksmith's iron.
Oh, no, it was worse. They slit his, don't turn this off for a minute, if you don't like torture. In order to, they always punish regicides harshly, don't they? And this guy was probably a schizophrenic, and he'd stabbed unsuccessfully the king 6 or 7 times with a small knife. He said before they began, "The day will be a hard one for me." Oh, it was. They pulled him by his wrists and ankles, stretched him out. They slit his biceps and his quads and poured molten lead into them. They then attempted to tear off his arms and legs with the horses.
And that failed.
They pulled and pulled and pulled, and they couldn't. So the executioner made cuts to try and help. It was barbarous, and it went on for fucking hours. Hours and hours. Sorry, this whole subject of execution and like execution by ordeal, it fascinates me because of it's all rooted in, well, it's the psychology of it's all rooted in fear. So sorry, carry on.
No, so if he starts a book like that, people tend to read Madness of Civilization, which is a shortened version of a much longer book, which was, I think it was called The History of Madness. And if you're interested in history, I always loved it at school. You could read tome after tome after tome, and they've published relatively recently, Foucault, he did a lot of lectures that they transcribed. So they tended to be the basis for his later books, and there's some fascinating detail in those. And towards the end of his life, he became obsessed with the classics, classical learning. He called it care of the self. And they had this concept of going back to the ancient Greeks. So you could argue he's responsible for certain things, but you don't get much more traditionalist than the bloody ancient Greeks.
Right.
And this is what he was espousing just before he died. Yeah. So the idea that he's somehow guilty for a generation of students who don't read, don't understand what they have read, and somehow you can blame this, whether you like him or not, massively erudite, brilliant writer. I just find it, and I think this is the Douglas Murray. Have you ever watched? You're not interested in sport, but there's a 606 is a football phone-in.
Okay.
And there's 2, Robbie Savage and Chris Sutton are very funny. And they have this catchphrase, "You're better than that." And I feel like just if I could speak to Douglas Murray, you're better than that, Douglas. You're a good thinker. You've got integrity. I've seen him debate politicians, and it's so obvious. He's the gentleman in the room.
Yes.
And he's got moral fibre. And the politician is a snake oil salesman.
Yes.
So I love that about Douglas Murray. And he's always incredibly rational. You know his assumptions, you know his analysis, you know his conclusions, and they always fit together nicely. On postmodernism, he's let himself down. He's got this, you would call it shadow work. He's projecting onto all the ills of the world onto postmodern thinkers who I would argue are trying to, A, they're irrelevant in terms of actual power.
Yeah.
B, they're trying to describe the mess that actually started with modernism.
Yes.
That we've never resolved.
Yes.
It's like, that quote from Mao when they said, "What do you think of the French Revolution?" He said, "It's too early to tell."
Right.
I honestly think that's what we are still dealing with, modernism.